Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast. Good to have you here for this episode. I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor, and I serve a church right outside Portland, Oregon. And I've written a few things, and my most recent book is In the House of Tom Bombadil, and I'm a senior editor for Touchstone Magazine. How about you, Tom?
I'm Tom Price. I teach theology, Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and I also serve a church here in Connecticut.
All right. So, Glenn, why don't you introduce yourself and then take us right into the subject of the day?
Yes, I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired history professor, which is going to become almost immediately relevant. I am a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. I have my own ministry, Every Square Inch Ministries, at esquareinch.org. And these days I'm writing primarily on Substack, but I do have a book in the works on reenchantment, that an early version of which is showing up on videos on my Patreon. So
Excellent.
That's me. I wanted to start off today by talking about the conditions that existed that actually led to the rise of Hitler, because I think there's some relevance to this for today, although maybe not in the way people might expect. When World War I ended, there were a couple of different things that happened within Germany that really helped set up Hitler. One of them is that the people had been kept from hearing what was really going on during the war. They did not know that they were losing. And so when the announcement came that Germany had surrendered, this blindsided everybody.
Wow.
And the result of this is two things. First of all, Hitler will play on this. He'll argue that there was a stab in the back, as he put it, that the existing institutional structures had betrayed the German army and stabbed them in the back, and that's why they lost the war. The other part of this, of course, is that the Jews were behind it. Okay. So you have this idea of a Jewish conspiracy combined with institutional betrayal of the army. But then, to make matters worse, you have the Treaty of Versailles, which blamed Germany completely for the war, which wasn't really true, and imposed incredibly harsh retribution payments, basically. You know, they were told they had to pay for everything. All the war, the costs of the war and everything else for the victorious sides. There was just this massive amount of reparations that were required of them. And these were so severe that there was, the idea was to prevent Germany from ever being able to rearm. Perhaps an admirable goal, but the problem is that this created a situation that was really impossible for Germany. When Germany wasn't able to keep up on its payments to France, for example, France simply moved in and occupied the Ruhr Valley, which was a major coal mining area, so that they would be able to export the coal to France to, basically repay what they were supposed to under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The government decided that the way to handle this was to vastly inflate the money supply so that they could pay the French particularly back using devalued currency. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that it raised costs for people in Germany. It's a pretty well-known incident that women would actually ended up burning marks to heat their homes and to cook their food because it was cheaper than buying firewood. Right. People would bring whole wheelbarrows full of paper money to shops to buy a loaf of bread. My brothers were stamp collectors, and I inherited their stamp collection. And I have stamps in there that are surcharged. That is to say, you have the original stamp that was for whatever value, and then it was run through the printing press again with a new value added on it. I have stamps that are surcharged to 6 million marks for a postage stamp. This is the situation that exists in Weimar Germany. On top of that, you do have a proverbially decadent elite culture that is somehow avoiding all of this. And the result is that people in Germany were understandably upset. They were understandably aggrieved by what had happened. They were understandably feeling like they have been they're being exploited. That they have been put in an absolutely no-win situation that is going to leave them in a state where there's no possibility of recovery. And this is precisely what Hitler played on. Again, the stab in the back, the Jewish conspiracy, and all of that. And Hitler's genius in a lot of ways was to, first of all, identify the genuine problems and the genuine grievances that the German people were feeling. And secondly, to point a villain out to them. It's not your fault. It isn't your fault. It's the old institutions that stabbed the army in the back, and it's the Jews, and especially the Jews, who are behind all of this. So now you have him acknowledging, like Bill Clinton, feeling their pain. Adding to that, someone that he can point to that is responsible for it, both the old system and especially the Jews. And then he can present himself as the one who understands the situation and will solve their problems. He will bring back German greatness. He will bring back the economy. He will do all of these things.
Well, I think and I think right with that, the one you just threw in there shouldn't. I mean, I think it's one of the highlight points is he had an antenna on this notion of what German greatness could look like. He was from the arts, and he understood how, especially in the intellectual culture, the way in which Romanticism could re-narrate what looked like a traditional culture, but its roots are actually ripped out of it. So it can be very manipulated. In other words, you can restore the Kaiser, right? Restore the kind of old European orders of politics, but also German culture, Geist, the way in which they contributed to the Enlightenment with Kant. They have a rich intellectual history. They have a rich theological history with the Reformation. But when Hitler turns to those as things that need to be accented, he's not turning to those the way somebody who wanted to properly retrieve a culture to take those rich minds and develop it further. He's doing something deliberate to turn the culture to him by appealing to those things. It's indebted very deeply to a kind of romantic notion of those things.
Yeah, and by the way, we can add to that the Jews are a very likely scapegoat for the simple reason that they've been scapegoats throughout history. Anti-Semitism was strong in that area, to begin with.
Yeah.
My grandparents moved out of what was then Austria, is now Poland, via England here. They were Jewish. And I am convinced that one of the reasons they came to America was because they were probably fed up with the anti-Semitic attitudes in the region. And America was always the land of opportunity for everybody. This was our image. All of these things are factors. He is certainly playing on a mythology of the German people. He's certainly playing on Romanticism. He's picking up on Wagner. He's doing all of these kinds of things. But I think the most important thing that he did was connect with the German people by identifying with their suffering. I used to do this in class. It's probably one of the few lectures, aside from my plague lectures, that my students may remember. I used to talk about this, and I would say, Hitler was a master orator. He was a master rhetorician. And what he would do is he would come out and, when we think of Hitler speaking, we usually think of him standing sort of ramrod straight and gesticulating and ranting and raving and all this kind of thing. And that's really Allied propaganda. I mean, they wanted to make him look like a nutcase. But he would actually walk out and very calmly start a speech in which he would start identifying the problems that the German people were facing. And they were genuine problems. And I would go on to say something like, it would be as if I came out and said to you, and I started articulating all of the things that I knew students were nervous about. Jobs, whether they'd be able to pay back their student loans, income, all of these kinds of things that I knew that they had problems with. That I knew that this was something that, at least in the back of their mind, they were worried about. And then I gradually shifted it from that to, what the real problem ends up being is the government, that both parties are thoroughly owned by the banks and by corporations. It's the lobbyists who really determine what goes on in Congress. It's not you. And if you think the Democrats are the party of the people, you've got to think again, because more Democratic senators are multimillionaires than Republicans. And they're all in the pocket. And I would be going through all of this and gradually bring in more and more plausible sounding, but kind of conspiracy theory things. And while I was doing this, I would be getting myself more and more worked up emotionally, because after all, this is affecting my kids too. I care about this stuff because, and so on. And so that by the end, I was getting seriously intense and basically ended up telling them, and really the only solution to this is to get rid of the government that's there and elect me. And I actually, on at least one occasion, the class burst into applause. I had several people say, "I'll vote for you." I mean, but the point here is that's what Hitler did. Start calm.
But let me just push back a little bit here, Glenn. That's what all politicians do.
Right, but Hitler did it at a higher level. And the trick,
what I'm getting at is this is endemic to democracy. Mm-hmm. In other words, this is a sort of thing. So, for example, to get elected, you've got to be able to emotionally appeal to people. Reason is not sufficient. Anybody that spends any time talking to a crowd knows that if you only have a measured and reasonable address, the only people that you'll have even listen to you are people at a certain education level and people who already agree with everything you're saying. So when we think about the history of the analysis of democracies, the demagogue is, you're talking about demagoguery, is the kind of classic sort of degradation of a republic. You get to this place where you have the demagogue who's able to get a mass of people to support him and overturn everything.
Yeah, the thing about Hitler, I mean, I agree with you on all of that, but Hitler, number one, was genuinely malevolent. But number two, what was really interesting is the way he used rhetoric. Start calm, build the intensity up when you connect with the audience so that the intensity was shared with the audience, was brought up to your level of intensity. Hitler once got an ovation for the sentence, "Every man has a mother." Okay. You've got to be really good to pull that off. Okay. The point here, though, is that ability to connect and that ability to sort of drag them along emotionally led to all of the horrors of World War II.
And it's interesting the way in which, like you said, there was a whole cocktail of things in place that were readied for manipulation. You know what I'm saying? I mean, when you have, especially the degradation they felt after losing to France, just the morale in the culture, the humiliation in relationship to France in particular, the stuff you mentioned. I mean, that was a huge, huge issue. And the way in which, the kind of things that gave them their strong germ, they were very proud of their heritage and their traditions. And these things now are almost being, ridiculed and mocked around the surrounding places, and so this tapping into that kind of raw protective, in this very Darwinian sense, this kind of sense of which, we've been knocked down, but we should be great. We should be great based on our culture, our heritage, the things we have to offer. As a matter of fact, we should be the greatest. It moves in this direction. Rather than be looking at the lowest and the loser, we should be the winners, and we should be the ones showing them. And the only reason we're not the winners is because of these things that have held us back, again, it's this kind of notion, Nietzschean notion, that, it's only been because of our conscience and our sort of kind of Christian goodwill that we've become slaves to some other master. And so you really see him exploit this shift, even using Christianity in a way to darken and to bring about a kind of attraction to what he's saying and almost Christianize it, and then turn the knife once he gets there. So much so that the Catholics sign a concordat with him. And he utilizes this notion of created natures or orders of natures to justify their kind of move towards dominance and dominion.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong Darwinian element here. It's worth noting, just sort of as an aside, because this is, again, relevant for a lot of white supremacists today. Hitler talked about the Aryan race. The history of that idea is rather interesting. The word Aryan comes from the word Arya, which means either something like noble or honorable, in the Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European language family. And so the Aryans were originally understood to be all of the Indo-European people. Okay, all the Indo-European people are Aryans. And it was correctly believed in the 19th century that they originated in the area around the Black Sea. However, there were some German anthropologists who said, well, no, that's not really the case. The Aryans started in Germany and Scandinavia among the Germanic peoples, and they are actually, using the scientific racism of the period, they're actually a subrace. And they are superior to the other races. Yeah. They were wrong on every point. Yeah. But this was the idea that was adopted and believed by Hitler and used in supporting his programs. And of course, you also have the Jews who are working to undermine the superior Aryan race. It's sort of a worldwide conspiracy that's
that Nietzschean Darwinian kind of reading, is that, and they really did hold these views. I mean, they thought they were following the science. It wasn't as though they were the way we tend to be with scientism today, realizing its overreaches. I mean, they saw themselves as at the forefront of scientific knowledge. So did communism. They saw themselves at the forefront of sociological thinking that had never been known before, and they're enlightened, and then they move to, this is the direction we need to go, and that's the kind of horrors we end up getting.
Yeah, there's always a bait and switch with scientism, particularly when people intend to use it to support some kind of political program.
Yeah.
So, you move from the indicative, this is what is the case, to the moral, which is this is what you ought to do. Yeah. And and like I said, it's a sleight of hand. It happens imperceptibly, and it's a cheating. And, and the point you made about particularly eugenics, and then of course dialectical materialism, which is kind of a laughable appeal to science. Yeah. when you look at it, I think that if there's anything that you could say for dialectical materialism in terms of its scientific basis, it would be that basically entropy levels everything out. So heat death is the final state, and that's like the communist paradise, where nobody has there are no hierarchies. Everybody is just sort of like, I don't know, just not really accomplishing a lot because they're not working with anybody else. But and the state owns everything, and since you're the state, it's just kind of goofy stuff. But Now, with eugenics, that one is a particularly, I think, difficult one to address because when we think about, say, traits that are advantageous for certain things. So let's just think about something like the marathon and the fact that it tends to be dominated by Kenyans, who I think it's Kenyans. When you watch them, it's effortless running. I mean, you're seeing these people, and you're just awestruck, and you say, there's something about their physiology that just makes it possible for them to dominate the sport. And everybody else is like, just trying to catch up. There's that observation, and then there's the observation we should, or there's the kind of what people take away from that is therefore we should breed for that. There's no sort of a transition from the is to the ought here that's honest. It's just sort of like an assumption. Therefore, we should breed for that, and you can use that to apply to basically the entire eugenicist project.
Well, and I think the thing that Hitler, at being one person to do is a significant amount. Of course, he had a team of those you have to get to go along with it, and the team was made up of people that didn't start out as rogues. They started out in military. They started out in the academic fields. I mean, we're talking about people, quote unquote, that you would typically go with the cultured, right, of that time. And to get it, it's not too many steps to have anyone in ovens. And I mean, I think one of the things I remember, because I wrote my dissertation on Barth's Barman material, that the formative years that led to resistance in that time period. And one of the things that I always remember back when I was studying this before the COVID stuff is, how did it get that far? How did it get to where you have everyday common people wanting to really treat another human being like they're vermin? Not just they weren't just doing it to the Jews; they were the gypsies, and they started to get this way. And I do understand all humans can become desensitized to things. I mean, you can go into the inner city and you're constantly bombarded by people begging for money. You can sometimes be like, look, I don't have any, that I could share today. But here you're talking a step much further down the road. Yes, it's promoted and instigated, but I remember during COVID watching kind of this mass psychological delusion, if you will, start to come over a populace that would, when you have Noam Chomsky, well, you scratch one of these people, you get the real deal to come out. Basically saying, if you haven't had the vaccine, you shouldn't be allowed to go to the grocery store and get food. Okay.
And that's mild. I've seen people say much worse.
Yeah. And now they really are. I mean, this is really, you do have, you hear when this young guy, Kirk, was shot, you had university people celebrating, say this should be done to anyone who holds views like that, any traditionalist or conservative Christian or conservative American. This was a thing to be celebrated. So again, it's not but one or two steps away from some kind of thing equivalent to those ovens. So when you have those conditions in place, and then you have a defensiveness start to arise on people being attacked or people that would happily be killed or shot, and they're talked down by the universities endlessly, and they're made to think of themselves as second or third or not even worth existing, you can either tuck your tail or you can punch back. And I think the next point in all of this is that we're back in conditions that make the punch back about to happen.
Yeah. Another kind of feature to this that's important to include is that there was another totalitarian movement that existed concurrently, and there were street fights, and there were street. There was a lot of back and forth between the brown shirts and what the fascists, were they? I mean, not the fascists, the communists. Were they black or were they red? I can't remember the shirt. They had basically kind of uniforms that you wore in these scuffles.
And the people, interestingly enough, would the same person might be on one side or the other at any one time. I mean, they shifted back and forth because they were desperate to find a solution.
Yeah, I remember reading a really fascinating book on that very theme. It was entitled Dedication and Leadership. I think that author's name was Douglas Hyde, and he had been a communist. And he was converted, and he became a Christian, and he was reflecting upon the indoctrination and leadership development tactics of the Communist Party. I think he wrote for Workers. What was it? I can't remember the name of the publication, but anyway, I think he was in the UK, and but he noted that the best recruits for the communists were the former fascists. Disillusioned fascists would make the best recruits.
Yeah. So it's worth noting that Goering, who's basically Hitler's second in command, apparently when asked, this guy was cultured. He was personally charming and charismatic, the kind of person you'd want to have at a dinner party. When he was asked why he followed Hitler, apparently he said something to the effect of, "He made me proud to be a German again." Now, the reason why I wanted to bring this one up is we are facing a situation right now where we've known the left went way overboard with the woke stuff, and we see the anti-Semitism and stuff there couched in anti-Zionist language, but it's really aimed at all Jews. Let's be real here. We're seeing a similar phenomenon emerging on the right, and in particular, we see this, for example, with Nick Fuentes. And his really softball interview with Tucker Carlson. Rod Dreher talked to a number of younger, Gen Z type Republicans in D.C. who were working for the government. They told him that something like 30 to 40% of the young GOP workers were Groypers. They're followers of Fuentes, who is an overt racist, anti-Semite, who praises both Hitler and Stalin. And the sense that he got, that these guys were saying, is not so much that they had something they wanted to rebuild or something like that. They just wanted to tear down. They just wanted to destroy the system that put them in the position that they were facing. A system that they saw, I think correctly, is rigged against them. And you can't understand what's going on with that stuff unless you understand that they do have legitimate grievances, and they are moving in these directions for much the same reason that the people in the Weimar Republic looked to Hitler, except Hitler was offering them an ostensible solution. What they're just after is a death work.
So I was interviewed by the folks over at New St. Andrews last week when I was there for the New St. Andrews board meeting, and they wanted me to talk on a theme that I had done a little bit of work on, but haven't really fully developed, and that is how to defeat communism in your spare time. And what I noted is that the term spare time is absolutely important. What I meant by that is that it's what you're doing really with the rest of your time that matters. And I think the problem that we have is we have a kind of bias toward a revolutionary mindset as opposed to the mindset of a builder. So builders, if you think about benevolence, so if you think about, okay, how do you change something for the better? Or how do you address a problem in your community? Well, the ideal has been lost. And I think the ideal is I am a pillar of my community, and when I call City Hall, somebody picks up the phone and listens. In other words, I've done some things that give me some cachet, give me some credibility in the community, and I'm valued. And since I'm valued, the people in charge actually listen when I call. That's a long, laborious process to become a patrician. Getting there takes years. You need to invest yourself in a community 30 plus years before you can say, unless you're just like an overnight success, or your business just as remarkably successful. It takes a while. What we're doing here in Battleground is much more along that line. So we have influence in City Hall. We have allies across the city, people who know us and we know them. Just had a member of my church elected to the school board. He won 63% of the vote. It wasn't even close. And he was going up against an establishment public educator. So that his opponent had all the connections and all of that. So what these guys, the fact that they're working in Washington in the GOP establishment, in my mind, it demonstrates they don't really get this older way of having influence in a community. They want the instantaneous change.
They would also argue that the older way has ultimately betrayed their generation.
Yes, I get that, but I would maintain that the thing I'm thinking about has actually been much more sort of sidelined as well. So I'm not talking about, say, the bureaucrats in local government. I'm talking about people who have a presence in their community because they've lived there a long time and have done a lot of things that have benefited people that may have nothing to do directly with some kind of government bureaucracy. They're just known and loved because of their contributions. But that means staying put. That means working hard. That means going through the good times and the bad times with the community. And that just does not appeal to anybody.
Well, I don't know.
So
I do.
Well, let me just finish this one thought. I do think that there are a lot of young guys when you give them that vision. So I think the thing that we really need right now, yes, we need to say, don't do that, but I also think we need to say, this is what you need to do. So, because if all we do is say, don't do that, then they're just going to not listen to us.
Yeah. But I've seen signs, and more than once. I mean, I'm seeing it even at the university. I had a young interview. One of the head of the department had a young guy from the school meet with me because he's asking questions about a future in ministerial work. A 20-year-old. He says, "I'm not ready yet. I've got to build some things to build, but I'm thinking about this later." They're all drawn very similarly to things that are anchored and in place. This is some of the things that are attractive. I met a 21-year-old girl at a conference this weekend. Same thing, same conversation in this age group. So I think there is a sense that they need to find these places that they can have real roots, something that even if it feels real roots, because so many of these things have been taken from them. And the generation just one up above. What do? Well, they make great money. Their jobs are online and they're traveling the whole world. No roots, no connectedness, right. None of that. And again, this may be just a temporal phase for a generation, but nevertheless, I think it's a sign of hope because the alternative is what we're starting to, the attraction to kind of what looks like roots in certain kinds of identity are really a kind of a variation of what I would call postmodern romanticism. It's a way of trying to erase or blood and soil have a kind of idea that you're connected to that when you're not really building things and you're not really invested in the things you're talking about.
Yeah, I think though we actually, one of the things that's a danger here is that we need to acknowledge the way the system has failed them, because one of the things that Rod was hearing pretty consistently, and I believe this, is the sense that your older conservatives who want to try to rein in the racism or the anti-Semitism or stuff like that, they do this without really having a clue why this stuff is appealing. They don't really relate so well to the struggles of that generation of people, and particularly the young white men.
And on that point, the Enlightenment model that underwrote the liberalism that older generation of conservatives is invested in is done with this generation. They don't. They see it as one more aspect of that quote unquote will to power that never had an interest in them. So this is a postmodern kind of re-narrating of an identity. And so the old appeals to liberalism as the buffer where everyone can find their place through a kind of shared consensus, which a lot of the older conservatives appeal to. That's not there for them, and it's not going to be. It's not a solution to this group.
Right. Yeah, I think Rod came out with something today, kind of addressing that, essentially stating that kind of the Reagan vision is not going to carry the day with these guys. Yeah, I'm with you on all that stuff, and I've got a lot of these guys in my church. I interact with them all the time, and I'm actually considered by a lot of those guys to be kind of one of the only boomers who understands.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier, this is a game I was playing with my students years ago, and when you look at what their situation is, particularly if you're college educated, you're downwardly mobile as a college grad right now. You're downwardly mobile. You've been taught, go to school, take out all the loans, you'll do great when you get out, and it won't be a problem. Well, it's a massive problem. Mamdani got elected on the basis of downwardly mobile Zoomers primarily. People who were supposed to move into the elite circles who found them closed to them. If you're, they saw COVID and all the frank tyranny that the government pushed through there. They've looked at DEI programs that have systematically blamed white males for everything since they were children. They watch these ridiculous land acknowledgments. They, on and on and on. They look at the whole system and they say, there's nothing here that works. The whole thing is rigged against me, just like they said in the Weimar Republic. And as a result, someone who, like Hitler did, someone who can say, it's not your fault, it's X group of people who stabbed you in the back, the boomer specifically, and add to it the Jewish conspiracy that's out there, that somehow this 0.2% of the world's population is controlling everything that's going on. But in any event, it's not rational. But this Jewish conspiracy, this is why anti-Semitism is rising. This is why there's a reevaluation of Hitler. This is why all of these things are going on. It's because there are people out there who are saying it's not you are facing real problems. I understand those problems. It's not your fault. It's this guy's fault, or it's that group's fault. It's exactly the playbook that we saw in Weimar Germany.
The constant blaming and the desensitization, but also, like you said, I don't know if you get the best metaphor for this, but also the way in which every kind of speech act that was not acceptable to this paranoid, just let's face it, mentally ill left. That's what we're dealing with here. And to borrow from Freud, what you've seen is the repression of so much of this stuff now bubbled over since because it became so ridiculous, to the point where I know somebody's looking up a word for historical reasons on the AI of Google, to which it was told, we can't look that up because one of the words in it is offensive. Woke AI to the point where I've been talking, because I have teenagers, to friends of that group. They do not withhold a word or anything on their tongue because it's offensive. They don't care about that. And that is not what the woke left wanted to happen to the generation after them.
Well, this brings up something that, has become a term based, essentially the idea that you're not going to allow yourself to be intimidated by the people you're just describing right now, Tom.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to this tendency to scapegoat, I mean, if you think about René Girard, this is a practice that goes back a long ways, and it's not exclusive to the Bible.
Yeah.
If you read René Girard, he's drawing examples from history and so forth, from all over the place. So again, this is a kind of thing that I think, when we're trying to direct people away from this kind of stuff, my advice is let's direct them toward constructive things, not just simply shame them for things that they.
Sorry about that. Even little cold rain. That's very constructive.
That's a great thing to direct them toward.
That's right.
But I do think a lot of guys that I'm working with are actually, as you already noted, guys that they're hungry for that and they're open to that. But the virtues that are called for are challenging for them to practice. For example, patience, the long view, putting up with a lot of mess, not letting yourself get trapped. That's where a lot of these guys, and this is exasperating for me, because they'll actually paint themselves to a corner and get themselves they'll hurt their own cause, and then that just makes them angrier.
Yeah.
They ruin their own prospects. And so my advice to a lot of these guys is wise up, invest in some things that have some potential for the long term. I also think what we need to do is we really do need to talk turkey with the older generation. So, and they're in denial about the changes. So, you'll have some, person who graduated when I graduated in 1985, talk about, well, I worked my way through school and I was in my first house by the time, I was, 28 and all this kind of stuff. And they're just not in touch with the way the world has changed.
No.
And they benefited from a really sort of unparalleled moment in the history of the West.
Yeah.
All of your international competitors are like destroyed, literally destroyed. Yeah. You're the only game in town. Yeah. and so the American boom following the Second World War is not kind of the norm.
No.
And
this generation has never seen a serious economic downturn. Right. I mean, you had the housing bubble, but that's about it. I remember when after I was out of grad school in the mid '90s, I was teaching at Calvin College, so it's somewhere between '92 and '94. I remember commenting to my fellow professor with whom I was carpooling that I would never own a house because the interest rates were so incredibly high. There was no way I thought I could afford a payment. They eventually came down and okay, fine. But they've never experienced that. They've never seen that in their lifetime.
Speaking of the boomers, right?
Yeah. Well, no, the current generation.
They've never seen it. They've never seen it come down.
They've never been in a situation where buying a house seemed completely out of reach in their lifetime until just recently.
Yeah, well, even my generation has been dealing with that issue. I mean, let's just take an example. We're familiar with being a university teacher, instructor, professor. Even if you have a decently endowed chair now, it's usually not enough in certain places to even buy a home or support it. And if you're looking at salaries in academic, it's embarrassing right now for the way in which I've seen some. I mean, well, I'm not going to list it on here, but it is for the amount of investment of people and the few that are going to get those jobs. It's a scam, and people better run from it unless they necessarily have to be in it. It is not, and so there's a lot of jobs like that you do so much education for, and your chances of getting them are slim to none unless you fit certain grids or certain people, and the ones that you can get will not support you, and you will end up still have to do 2 or 3 jobs just to make it. And this is everyone's reality.
Right. Yeah, I think that this is, a big part of the story too. There's been a number of people who've noted that men aren't going to college, and they've commiserated about that. But what I think is a better take is basically, why should I? Considering the debt load that I'll find myself in, and the miserable prospects that I'll find myself having to face. So, right now, there's been a few articles that have been published recently about the difficulty Harvard grads are facing finding work. And so, if you say to yourself, well, if they can't find work, what hope do I have going to the state school or whatever? And then you have people like Peter Thiel and others who are saying, don't go to work. Don't go to college. Come and work for me.
Yeah.
I'll take you right out of high school. If you're bright and I think you got potential, you'll learn everything that you need to learn in order to be, well, Peter Thiel. But think about it. Think about Bill Gates dropped out. Elon Musk dropped out. Mark Zuckerberg dropped out. I mean, all the major, figures that people would say identify as being the super success stories dropped out.
And that's actually not a new story. You can see similar kinds of things going back decades. So it's but again, the problem becomes. I would say that there's a lack of sort of historical perspective. There have been bad times in the economy, even though they haven't seen it. There have been bad times before. We're nothing like the Great Depression. I mean, I don't even remember that, but I know a bit about what that was like from my parents. But just telling them that isn't going to solve their problem. They are facing they are facing a situation where they don't believe they're ever going to own a home. They don't believe they're ever going to find a spouse. They don't believe that the traditional routes for living are really open to them. And they're not entirely wrong there. Now, what you are right, Chris, that what we need to do is to give them alternatives to DeathWorks. But we have to do it in such a way that we don't get an okay boomer in response.
Yeah, I think, and it just gets me back to what I was thinking about earlier. I think we need to recover an intergenerational approach to household building. So, in the case of my family, my 3 kids, I've been involved in helping them in different ways to get into houses, household, owning property and so forth. A lot of it, had to do with coaching. But there were other practical things that I was doing to encourage and help them along. And now, did anybody do that for me? No, nobody did. And maybe that's what boomers need to realize is that the conditions have changed to such an extent that even though they didn't need that kind of coaching, that world in which you didn't need coaching is gone.
Yeah.
You need a situation where you actually have some people who have some knowledge, some skill that are working with you to get you established. Even down to like finding a mate.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I look at my dad's world, just about, that generation, a lot of them were in the military. A lot of them took up trades. I knew welders in the neighborhood. Everything had homes, 2, 3 cars. I mean, there were years they had to build up and work their way up to that. But all these things were available. They married at a decent age, had several kids for the most part. And then you jump up and just within a generation or two, you already start to see those dynamics change. But I think even as Glenn noticed, the way in which the experience of my high school versus my son and the relationships they have, who's finishing up high school now, is completely different. And and I know a lot of people in their 20s, young 30s who just talk about men who talk about that they can't even meet women interested in dating, much less
most of the women have been ruined by the educational
systems. And so there's a lot. So even with coaching in certain areas, you may be able to, start finding, digging your way and finding this. But I think this was back to Glenn's point. You have so many conditions for being attracted to negative impulses and manipulation. I'm not saying everyone is going to fall into that, but those conditions are there. And so it doesn't surprise when you hear, we've said it a long time ago, once you hear things go so far in one direction, you're going to start seeing the guard come down on the other side. And this isn't Hegel's dialectic. This is just it's pretty obvious that's going to happen. The people are going to punch back at some point, and what you're seeing is a punchback, but how much and how far it's going to go and who's directing it is going to be a big issue in the days ahead. But you're seeing some of those sinister impulses show up in culture now.
Right.
Yeah. And again, the thing that I just keep coming back to is the degree to which we're seeing Hitler apologists get a respectful treatment on Tucker.
Right.
I wonder where some of these people went to school. I read things like, nobody ever talks about why Hitler rose to power. Nobody ever talks about the situations that were in Germany. Have you ever read anything? I mean, every time I actually cover that in classes that aren't covering World War II, or at least I did when I was in teaching. But
I don't think they do. What they do when they go to school is they get called a Nazi. So naturally, they're going to be attracted to Hitler. I mean, that's what I mean. They don't teach the stuff like we used to learn it. That this stuff is really characteristic of the political. Of anything that the left, because the left dominate a lot of the secondary schools up, especially up here, and that's the stuff they're teaching. It's not a thorough history of the conditions that went on in Germany, like I remember getting when I was in school. And similar, I mean, I was in school when there was still a wall up in East Germany, so. This stuff was everyday stuff. This generation's removed from that, and especially these young guys who have been on the basically been scapegoated. And if they don't conform or comport or deny fundamental things about themselves or shame themselves with it, then they're not going to be accepted by the elites or the broader culture. So they're going to go in those subcultures.
Or their schools,
Right.
The comments that whenever this comes up, there are a couple of things I've got to say. One of them is, you know what, we've been teaching that, about why Hitler rose to power. That is something that has not been hidden. Number two, all of these new insights into Hitler aren't new. None of these guys have uncovered a single source that hasn't been analyzed to death by World War II historians. Yeah. And they're ignoring a whole lot of stuff that is inconvenient for their particular theses. So I have no patience with that sort of thing. However, it's still important for us to understand why it's got traction. And it's important for us to understand or to come up with effective and creative responses to the stresses that young men, especially young white men, especially, are under in the culture, because otherwise things are going to move in a very ugly direction. They already have on the left. They're going to move even more on the right if we can't find a way of addressing the core issues.
And I know from the focus of my study, I think one of the things that Barman keyed into was the way in which the ground was often softened culturally by a weak theological emphasis in churches. And I think with especially the evangelical world that has embraced a lot of the techno-consumerist practices and formation, and the importing of a certain kind of liberalism that underpins its understanding of its core doctrines. It is very similar to the weak liberal theology that ended up becoming so weak in the face of this stuff that the opposing religious vision, which became National Socialism, became so attractive to these that knew that weak-kneed Christian vision that was being offered by theological liberalism was not going to be a competitor in that environment. And this is something, for all his faults, Barth and Bonhoeffer tuned into. And this is why their critiques of theological liberalism were so strong. I mean, very strong with the dialectical theologians, but again, they have their own weaknesses. But I think in churches, we see all this talk of retrieval, but I don't see anything that has the spiritual rigor and depth from the riches that Christian faith has to actually address the havoc that the kind of thin evangelical theology that we've criticized enough in its various forms has played into all of this. And it's ready to go along with the next kind of elite social vision, and leave these people behind as well.
Well, that's a big problem. And so far as we have evidence for that everywhere in terms of evangelical elites, they, it's kind of a given that they seek to placate the left and punch right. And I think that's one of the things that has helped to fuel this. Recently, I've been rereading some Harvey Cox. So here's a liberal theologian that had no direct connection to the evangelical world, and the trouble with Cox is he was blindsided by the New Left, and it's pretty evident that So I remember him. I liked him. But he had this sort of sunny Emersonian take on everything, and there wasn't the kind of sort of theological hardcore that would permit him to kind of have an antenna for what was coming on the left. He it's not as though he didn't see it coming, but he didn't know how to deal with it. One of the things he tried to do when he was at Harvard is he was actively recruiting evangelicals and Pentecostals, and he wanted to get Mark Knoll on faculty at HDS, and it was voted down by the New Left on the faculty, and he was at once disappointed, surprised, and angered by it all. But the fact that he couldn't foresee that they would resist demonstrated to me that he was living in kind of a fantasy world of we're all going to sing Kumbaya and hang out together, and it's just going to be a great time talking about our personal religious experiences, and that was going to be it, and so consequently now the New Left completely controls the divinity school, as well as increasingly evangelical schools.
Because we just saw Biola. Just heard about Biola on their psychology, the psychology department. It keeps showing up.
Well, apparently Christianity Today came out with an article on how the addition of erotica to ChatGPT could open up opportunities for evangelism.
I saw that.
What?
You have the soup ready for, as I said, for something vigorously and disturbing to arise, even from utilizing religious sentiment for sinister and dark purposes, and this is the kind of thing that we've seen it over and over again, and we're back there.
But I guess my last thought, and you should have the final say, Glenn, this is your episode, but my thought is this: whatever we do in terms of addressing these guys, we cannot come across in a way that allows them to lump us in with the Russell Moores of the world.
Yeah.
If we do that, we lose them.
Yeah.
It's just over.
Yeah. Well, what I would say, needs, my prescription, such as it is we need to be honest enough to recognize the real grievances that generation has. We need to offer them solutions that don't amount to do what we did. We need to address the real problems there. And Tom, you're absolutely right. We have to do it within a theological framework that is robust enough to keep them from falling off the edge into things like anti-Semitism, white supremacy, or anything like that. By the way, trad Catholics have got a real problem with anti-Semitism. I mean, despite the church's teaching against it. But what we've got to do is present a robust theological vision that helps them to avoid the pitfalls of demagoguery, but that also simultaneously helps address the real issues and the real legitimate grievances that they have. Because otherwise, it's paving the road toward true fascism and things like that. This is, again, we're replaying Weimar Germany otherwise.
Right. Anyway, we should probably wrap it up here. That's a good note to end on. Anyway, thanks Glenn, for the topic. And we thank you, listeners out there in Pugcast land, for tuning in for this episode. We hope that it's been helpful. And if it has, we could use your help. We have a Patreon account, and we have bills to pay. And it's always great when people check out our Patreon page and make a commitment to help us out on a month-to-month basis to pay the bills. Anyway, that's enough for now. Thanks a lot, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Battleground, Washington. The Theology Pugcast is produced and edited by Wiley Craft Productions of Nashville, Tennessee.